Hi, today I am bringing you my October wrap-up part 2. I did split my wrap-up into 2 parts, so if you missed the previous one, I will link it down below, just because I read a lot of books in October and I didn't want to shortchange any of their views, and I also didn't want to make the video really long. So the first book I read was Ray Russell's The Case Against Satan. This is a tale that predates The Exorcism and Rosemary's Baby and is fantastic. I absolutely love this. This deals with a priest who inherits his post. I'm blanking on the word for what a priest, like, not his diocese, because that's a bishop, but it does have a bishop and it does concern his diocese and one of the priests in it. And basically it deals with a young girl who appears to be possessed, and she does really, like, she's normally a really sweet and really kind girl, and when under these spells she just like spouts profanity and all this horrible stuff that they are quite shocked and horrified by. Ray Russell is a fantastic writer. I would definitely recommend him. As I mentioned in my previous wrap-up, I did read a bunch of his short stories, which were in the Penguin Horror Edition, which I really enjoyed, and I also really enjoyed this work as well. I definitely want to pursue some more of Ray Russell. This is a re-release by Penguin. I think it was released on like October 13th, so while I was waiting for it to come out, I read the short story collection. So yeah, I was quite enjoyed this. I would definitely recommend it if you like exorcism tales. It's not overly graphic, so there is some mention of possibility of rape if that is a trigger warning for you, but there is no actual rape in it. So yes, just in case that triggers you. So next up, I read a collection of short stories by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is in the Penguin Red Edition. It is titled Lois the Witch, which is one of the stories in it. This also contains The Poor Clare, The Doom of the Griffiths, Lois the Witch, and The Crooked Branch. I had read The Poor Clare before reading this, so I didn't reread it because it wasn't my favorite short story. But I really enjoyed this collection. The Doom of the Griffiths deals with, it's kind of like an Oedipus story almost, in which like there's a curse on the family and the son is going to kill the father. It's really fascinating. That was probably one of my favorites. I also really enjoyed Lois the Witch, which looks at the Salem witch trials and kind of the mania around that, which is really fantastic and really fascinating. I really enjoyed Gaskell's view on it. So I definitely recommend this. This is probably so far one of my favorites of the Red Classics that I've read. Next up is one that I had been meaning to read for a while, but I didn't order until Jean from Jean's Bookish Thoughts ordered it, and then we ended up reading it together because I caught up to her. And that is The Collector by John Fowles, which was recommended on Jean's channel when she read the John Burnside The Dumb House, and somebody recommended this in the comments, and we both were like, we need to read this. So this focuses on Frederick, who is a young man who collects butterflies, and he becomes kind of obsessed with this art student called Miranda, and he decides to set out and collect her as well. This is obviously a very messed up book. I've read a lot of like horror and kind of like spooky books this month, and this is one of them. I would not put this on the same level as John Burnside's The Dumb House. It's not quite as good as it, and part of it is because it has a split narrative. The first part of the narrative comes from Frederick and the second part comes from Miranda herself, which is really interesting to hear from the victim, but it does get a bit repetitive because it goes over a lot of the same days that Frederick has already covered, which I felt detracted from the story. Especially it made it drag a lot because you're like, I already know this, and you're not really giving me any new information, you're just giving me a different perspective, and like, you know, it wasn't that revolutionary, but I did still enjoy this. So if you like books like The Dumb House or like Perfume, A Story of a Murder, I would recommend this. I can't say that it's on par with them, but it will scratch that itch. Next up is another Red Classic, and I decided to read this at the last minute. I read this in a night, and it is a collection of short stories by Edgar Allan Poe. I haven't read much Poe. I've read The Telltale Heart, which is included in this collection. as well as The Raven, but I'm not super experienced with him, and this is The Mask of the Red Death, is the title of the collection. It does contain the story The Mask of the Red Death. Probably my favorites in this were The Mask of the Red Death, which, if you follow me on Goodreads, I was posting comments about each and every story that I read, and it reminded me a lot of the Decameron. It deals with a plague and a bunch of nobles running off to the countryside to try and escape it. I also really enjoyed The Black Cat, which I will warn does contain cruelty to animals, extreme cruelty to animals, in quite a graphic way, which I am very sensitive to. I do not like cruelty to animals. I'm very much against it. But it was probably one of the best written stories in here. Also Hot Frog was another one of my favorites. So yeah, if you are looking for some spooky Edgar Allan Poe short stories, I would recommend this collection. Or if you want a different edition, I'm just gonna pull this off the shelf behind me. All the stories that are in that are also included in the Penguin Horror Edition. I did do a cross-reference between the two, and this actually contains more short stories by him as well as poems. So if you're looking for a more definitive volume, get the Penguin Horror, but I do really like the pocket-sized Penguin Red Classic. So the last book I read is not a horror book. It's kind of like a fantasy sci-fi book, and I read it on my Kindle, and that is The Just City by Jo Walton. It's an interesting book. Basically, Athena gets the idea, like the goddess Athena, who I have on my ring, basically gets the idea to create Plato's Just City from his Republic, and sets about taking people from different points in time, and her brother, this is all in the first chapter, and her brother Apollo decides to enter the city as a human because he wants to answer the question as to why the nymph Daphne would rather turn into a tree than be raped by him. And he decides that the best way to understand this, because he's asked both Artemis and Athena how to do this, like for the answer, and he doesn't fully understand, is that the best way to do this is to become human. This is part of a series, and I don't normally read fantasy series, so this was quite a departure for me. I read it with Jean and Mercedes and a bunch of other people, and yeah, I can't say that this was my favorite book. I think I initially gave it 3 stars when I finished it, and then I thought about it, and like half an hour later I went back and changed my review to 2 stars. I have a lot of issues with this book. It dragged a lot. There's a lot of like moral implications that they go on and on about that like are important, but they really go on about it. It is a split narrative. Apollo is one of the narrators, and then there's 2 women in the Just City who are the narrators. One is one of the founders. Basically, they get a bunch of people who pray that they want to create the Just City and live in the Just City, and so she is one of the founders. She's a Victorian woman who loves Plato because he talks about, like, you know, educating women. And then the other perspective is from one of the slaves that is bought. They buy a bunch of roughly 10-year-old children from the slave markets to try and raise them in the ideals of the Just City. So you get the 2 differing perspectives from one of the creators of the city and somebody who is forcibly brought to the city without any consent or former knowledge. So it's interesting, but ultimately it kind of fell flat for me. I don't think I'm going to be pursuing the Philosopher Kings. I just don't care enough to follow through. I might get one of my friends just to give me a summary so I can know what's going on. I thought this was going to be a lot better because I love Greek myths, and I love especially Athena. Athena is probably my favorite of the Greek gods. Yeah, and I mean Artemis as well. I love Artemis as well, although she's only in it for a very short period of time. But yeah, I was very disappointed in this. So yeah. Leave in the comments below what you guys read in October, if you guys tried to read a lot of spooky books like I did, or if you went outside your normal genre. I did discover and I mentioned this in my other follow-up, that I don't like straight horror. I prefer gothic. So yes, that's what I learned from reading H.P. Lovecraft, and he's super, super racist. But yes, so leave in the comments below what you guys read this month, and I will see you in another video. Bye!